Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another Coffee and Conversations with my very special guest this morning, BJ Fogg. If you have participated in Coffee and Conversations in the past, you know that BJ and I will be having our coffee, and I hope you have some too, and having a great conversation. If you've got questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will try to get to those. But we get so immersed in the conversation itself, sometimes we forget to look at the chat. So BJ is the founder of the Behavior Design Lab at Stanford University. He is also the author of Tiny Habits. And if you want the authority on behavior design and habits, you want to listen to this conversation that BJ and I are going to have. So welcome, BJ.
Hi, Libby. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here, even though it's pretty early my time.
It is. You are California time. So this is a very extra special thank you. And I remember you telling me not to tell anybody that you were actually doing this. So we should keep this a secret.
Yes, this was a secret. Libby, when you asked me, Libby's awesome. You guys know this. She's amazing. So it's like, yes, I'm there. Let's chat.
Yeah, awesome. Well, BJ, let's get into it. I'm just trying to find the feed on my LinkedIn file over here, and I can see that. Okay, yes, I can see you on delay. So I'm just going to continue to look at the screen. BJ, let's start big picture and work our way down into something tiny. And let's do some myth busting before we finish today too, because there's a lot of stuff that people need to refresh on. So tell us a little bit about this is your lifelong work as a behavior scientist. You have been looking at behavior design. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Stanford, and then also the work that you do with industry.
Yeah, so I've been teaching and running a research lab at Stanford for over 20 years. And it has changed over time and evolved. Right now, my position is at the School of Medicine within a certain area there in health and human performance. So I run a research lab under that umbrella. And then I teach, and I just finished teaching a new class that I call Tiny Habits for Health and Happiness. So it's a mix between research. I have a research team comprised primarily of students and teaching. And I kind of get to teach whatever I want, but it's always about behavior change and helping students understand that, and more recently about helping them be happier and healthier because it's a tough time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the snapshot of Stanford. So that's half of what I do. The other half is me working in industry or working with people like you, Libby, and others, and teaching them how behavior really works so you can have impact in the real world. So I have an academic hat, I have an industry hat, and that balance, kind of try to balance that as best I can.
And one of your students, it was actually the founder of Instagram.
The co-founder, yeah.
The co-founder of Instagram. So that's fascinating because I think my Instagram feed is definitely habit forming. But
So, Instagram has changed a lot. When it first, it's become a very different creature than what it was started to be. Mikey and his co-founder sold, and they actually left Facebook. I believe they were unhappy with the direction of it. But yeah, the key there, I think, for Instagram was to make something that people already wanted to do, make it really, really easy, and then help people feel successful as they use the product. And the way I see it, it wasn't about the likes and the hearts and stuff. It was about the filters. So they kept Instagram super simple.
Yeah.
And through the filters, they help people feel successful. And Libby, you and maybe others listening in, notice that's the same pattern for Tiny Habits. Make it really easy, help yourself feel successful.
Yes.
That's just an enduring pattern across products that go big, and for our own habits
Yeah.
and behavior change endeavors. Yeah.
And I want us to get into, and we will, habits themselves. But it's interesting. I've studied with you. I'm a Tiny Habits coach. I attended the behavior design boot camp not too long ago with you, with some really fantastic folks from industry using behavior design for their internal employees, for their customers, for
Yeah.
change management. And I remember not too long ago, I think I was still in the course, I was talking to a client or a prospect about behavior design, and she said, "Oh, we do behavior economics, so we're good
Wow.
there." There's a difference. It's not the same thing.
Right.
So, can you just delineate really what behavior design is?
Yeah. I'll back up a little bit. Recently, I would say in the last few years, people have been talking about behavioral science more and more.
Hmm.
Rewind 20 years, I would almost never hear that term. I think it's kind of a new, companies have understood that behavior change matters.
Yeah.
And there is a systematic way to do it rather than just guessing. And I think that's what people are calling behavioral science. Now, there's different ways to look at it. And one of the angles is behavioral economics. What I've created is what I call behavior design. So it's a new set of models, it's a new set of methods, it's a system, and it works together. It's not a summary of old stuff. It's not rolling up behavioral economics or behaviorism or anything else like that. I think it's a breakthrough way of thinking about behavior, thanks to the Fogg behavior model, and a new way of designing for behavior change. And that is in part thanks to the industry side of me that I've done for at least 20 years. And before that, 10 years and so on. So drawing on the insights I could get as a researcher,
Hmm.
and then the practicality that goes back decades, and pulling those together to create this thing called behavior design. Yeah.
And it was, I've talked about behavior science and the work that I do, particularly in sales training or mindset work that I do with my clients. I've always come from a learning objectives perspective, right? What do we want people to do and know, do, apply, those sort of typical words associated, Bloom's taxonomy for anybody who's in learning and development on the call. But it shifted for me completely after doing the boot camp, that what I'm really doing when I'm training people is designing for behavior. Like,
Yeah.
I want them to actually do this stuff and have it make a difference. And so I'm designing for behavior. I'm not designing for learning necessarily.
Yeah. And that is such a great insight, and so good, I think, to bring up. I'll just keep going with the learning. So, my appointment, so I've had various appointments at Stanford, but for about 10 years, it was in the School of Education. So I'd get students that in my classes that were very interested in learning. I was like, let's take learning and break it down into the behaviors, the very
Mhm.
specific behaviors that will achieve the learning outcomes. However you think about learning, that very abstract thing, we can reduce that to specific behaviors.
Yeah.
And then once we have those, we can design for the behavior. So once once you start seeing the world in terms of behaviors, it becomes easier to understand how to achieve what you want, because you can
Mhm.
take whatever learning objective or whatever aspiration, break it down to behavior, design for those behaviors, and there's a systematic way to do that. So I don't know why that wasn't obvious to me like 30 years ago before I had behavior design. But once you see it, you see it, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, that's the right way to tackle anything, including learning challenges. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so your behavior, so let's talk about the book. And so 20 years of work. of research
Yes.
and application of that research. And the idea of habits has become very popular right now. But you are the scientist who has written the book on habits. And it is more than habits. I'm just going to fast forward to another slide that I have just to show. I'll
Yes.
come back to you
And
and I.
as you're pulling that up,
Mhm.
Libby, I must say, yes, there are some popular books written by journalists and marketers, but there's also some very good books written by my academic colleagues about habits. Okay. So
Yeah,
I am one of those.
one of
So I'm
them.
not the only researcher writing books about habits and behavior change. So yeah.
Got it. So right now I've got the book. We'll talk about, go buy the book a little bit later. I'm just going to come back to you and I so that we're nice and big.
Yep.
So the book is absolutely about tiny habits, but it also is more than that because you do really delve into behavior design.
Yeah. Yeah. It really, and let me, there was a point, well, from the beginning with my agent and talking to publishers, we weren't going to call the book Tiny Habits. We're going to call it the Behavior Code and other things. We had other names for it. And I was in discussions with various publishers that wanted to buy rights to the book, that one of them said, just call it Tiny Habits. And I was like, yeah, but it is more, it's Tiny Habits, but the book is really about behavior design with an emphasis on this. And you know this, so
Yeah.
you know this very well, but for others listening, with an emphasis on the Tiny Habits method.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes. And I love the tiny habits method. So let's talk about, first of all, why tiny? Like,
Yeah.
why does it need to be tiny when you are talking about habits, creating habits?
Um, because human motivation is not reliable. That's the shortest answer. That may not be super clear, so I'll expand on that. For any given behavior, our motivation won't always be high for it. Our motivation shifts around. And at a certain moment, you may be motivated to pay attention to a child. You may be motivated to uh, get your taxes in on time and so on. Our motivation shifts around. And it's not always about the habits that you have. And if a behavior is hard to do, you need lots of motivation to do a hard behavior. But
Mhm.
if it's easy, if it's tiny, you don't need a ton of motivation. And so that was the breakthrough for me. And this would probably be about 2010, looking at my own model, the Fogg behavior model. It's like, oh, the behavior is really easy. You don't need much motivation to do
Mhm.
it. Oh, that means that a habit's really easy. So a habit's a type of behavior. Behavior, habit's a subset. The habit's really easy to do. Then I don't have to worry about keeping my motivation high. Let me
Mhm.
try this. So I just started goofing around with making it ridiculously tiny, one drop of sunscreen,
Yeah.
not sunscreen on my whole face, etc. And it worked, because you can do the tiny things reliably. So accounting for the realities of human motivation, which means it shifts around, and the importance of habits, consistency. You want
Mhm.
to be, especially daily habits, you don't want to miss many. And when you put those two together, then it's like, man, the key is going really tiny and
Yeah.
making it really easy to do.
Yeah. And just an example, I was talking with a client yesterday who is looking at a career change, but everything seems to be getting in the way of her actually spending some quality time looking
Yeah.
at what else she could do. But it's clear that what she's doing right now is not what she wants to be doing. And she said, and I've even blocked like every morning, like 2 hours where I won't do anything else except focus on me,
Okay.
except that she doesn't because it's too big.
Yeah.
Right? A
Yeah.
2-hour time window can just, it sounds like a great idea, but it can just feel overwhelming. And so in the coaching yesterday, it was really about what is the very tiniest thing at the beginning of that time block that would be easy, and have you feel good that you could celebrate. So we'll talk about the recipe itself. That if it expands into more time, great. If it doesn't,
Yeah.
and you want to turn your attention to something else, then at least you've done that one thing. And it was, I think, probably the first breakthrough in terms of the, a variety of emotions that she's feeling around making this career change and what it's going to take, like what it's going to take to change my career. It's like, for me, that would be easy. I could do that, oh, there it is, right there. But most people don't. So I think that was just such a great example of how you can watch for those things once you understand the tiny habits method.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Good for you in that kind of coaching. Um, Even with, my last course at Stanford I just got the grades in yesterday, by the way, um, was about tiny habits, helping the students with health and happiness. And Stanford students have achieved. I mean, getting into Stanford is an achievement. That's a ton of work and so on. But they are like everybody else in this regard, where they can procrastinate or get overwhelmed or so on. And giving, this is probably a lot like your client. A big part of the class was transformative. I could go read some of the comments from it if you want. But I think it might have been the first time in their lives that somebody gave them permission to go tiny, to underperform, to just get started and do the starter step. And if you want to stop there, that's fine. If you want to keep going, that's fine. It was really liberating for them. And I started thinking of my work as a way to liberate people, where people have felt trapped or they felt ashamed or they felt like they got to beat themselves up. And what I think Tiny Habits does in this way of thinking about your life is it liberates you. You are no longer trapped. You don't have to beat yourself up. There are ways to make progress consistently, and in some ways, I want to almost say joyfully, but that might be a little bit of a strong word. But at least by feeling good, not by beating yourself up and feeling bad. I mean, the Stanford students are very good at, I got a test tomorrow, I'm going to stay up all night, I'm going to do all nighter, I'm just going to push myself, do the test, be exhausted, cycle through that. And changing I told them, I said, this could be the hardest class you've ever taken at Stanford. Here's why. It's not that you're going to spend the most time, or it's really hard coding task, but it's going to cause you, and I'm going to ask you to change how you process the world. Change to stop doing what got you into Stanford, which would be just willpower and discipline and just forcing yourself to do stuff, and just look at your life differently. And it was hard for the students, but it also means many of them grew in ways they didn't expect. And that made me really happy to see.
And I wouldn't underestimate the word joyful. It's a word that I have used in relation to this work, that it is, I mean, I got a gazillion certifications in, coaching and change management and all that kind of stuff, but I've never felt joyful the way I have coming through the work that I've been so privileged to be able to do with you. So I like the word joyful. And that leads me to an element of habit creation, which is celebration and feeling successful, etc. I'm going to read a very short quote from the book. So feeling successful isn't just a skill we use to lock in a habit. It's also an antidote for the go big or go home culture and a new lens through which to see yourself.
Yeah.
And so you've just been talking about that. You used the term, learn to underperform.
Yeah. I mean, how shocking is that for most people to hear? It's like, do less, lower your expectations. And in fact, I think I say that in that area. Okay, I'll just say it, lower your expectations. And that's hard for some people to do. And that's why I explain to my students, this is going to be a difficult class, because to but lowering your expectations is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's and to feel good about success, tiny successes, is a skill. So a lot of people can't. It's like, oh, all I did was, I wrote down 3 bullet points from my outline on my book or my project or whatever. Why should I feel successful about that? Because people are thinking I have to do something big to feel good about it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can relearn and you can acknowledge that good for me. I got started. I did what I intended. Way to go.
Yeah.
And that is, it's transformed because as you do it systematically within the Tiny Habits method, then you start doing it more naturally in other aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really changes how you process the world and how you go about your day.
Yeah. And the book goes on to talk about how, starter habits and starting small allows something to grow and multiply far more naturally than through, force and feeling crappy when you haven't done something.
Yeah, Libby, can I read something that came in last week from the 5-day program? I didn't intend to
Yeah.
read this, but
Yeah.
it was interesting. And it goes to this point. So I don't know who this is, though it is a woman and she's from Vacaville. So I only have the first name. So after the 5-day program, she says, after getting 30 pounds, I'd been stuck in a weird place. I even ran half a marathon and kept the 30 pounds. I felt defeated. Your Tiny Habits book or your Tiny Habits method provided me with clarity. Wow, it wasn't my fault. It was my approach. I did the 5-day program. My recipes had nothing to do with fitness, but you know what happened. This is why I printed it, because I loved her tone. But you know what happened. I worked out! Exclamation point. I ate more! Exclamation point. I kept my room organized! Exclamation point. I drank more water. I did all this by focusing on tiny habits. Thank you! Exclamation point. So,
I love it.
you've seen this in your coaching, and so have I. There's these surprising ripple effects that people don't often expect.
Yeah.
And they end up doing behaviors they didn't even intend to do, because change leads to change. Success leads to success.
Yes, absolutely. And the 5-day program that you're talking about is the free 5-day Tiny Habits Challenge. And your Tiny Habits coaches co-lead with you in these virtual programs. So just a quick plug, I'm going to do the coaching of a 5-day challenge next week. So if anybody listening wants to do the 5-day challenge next week and they want to do it with me, then send me a private message and we'll get you organized to start next Monday morning. But you can do this at any time with any of the qualified Tiny Habits coaches.
And the total time commitment during the 5-day program is about 30, maybe 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Total time for the entire week.
Yes.
We've tried to make it as simple as possible to get the biggest impact.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have to do some myth busting. I can't believe we only have 6 minutes left. Okay.
I will be brief.
All right.
If I can.
True or false? Repetition creates a habit.
False. Emotions create habits. There's no scientific evidence I can find, and I've looked a lot, that supports the idea that repetition creates the habit. So instead, and I name a chapter in the book to make it clear, emotions create habits.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Okay.
So we keep going.
Fantastic. Next myth. You've already talked about this. Motivation is everything. True or false?
Yeah, it's not really. I mean, yes, motivation is important in our lives. At the very highest level, help yourself do what you already want to do. So find where you want to change, not where you feel like you should. So in that case, it matters. But when it boils down to the specific habit, make it really tiny so you don't have to rely on motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Behavior is comprised of motivation. That's one thing. Ability, how easy or hard it is, and a prompt. So it's not everything. It's one of 3 things. And it's the least reliable thing.
Yeah. And we hadn't specifically talked about that. So anchor moments or prompts are super important. and it's not a myth to bust, but your research uncovered that you want to anchor the behavior that you want to start with a prompt. So what is a prompt?
Yeah. Well, it's anything that reminds you to do a behavior. At least that's how I define it in the model. It can be a post-it note, an alarm, it can be another person, and so on. In Tiny Habits, you don't use post-it notes, alarms, other people. You find what routine you already do, and you have that serve as a prompt, like starting the coffee maker. Oh, wow, after I start the coffee maker, I will text my mom or something like that. So you don't pick what I call a contextual prompt. We're bombarded with those, the post-it notes and all that. You design the habit into your existing routine so it comes after something reliable, like starting the coffee maker, that then becomes the prompt. In Tiny Habits, we call it an anchor, because you're attaching the new habit to something very solid in your routine. You're anchoring it down you're designing it into your existing routine.
Yeah, and I can tell you it works.
Yeah,
After I put my makeup on and leave my office, my bathroom is right there where I do set makeup. I write down my most high impact tasks that I need to accomplish that day.
Yeah.
And I started doing that, and then I would leave and go eat breakfast or, do other things. But when I came back to my office, there was that thing that I had to do. And it created a far more productive day. So it was like the tiniest little thing. I didn't have to sit down at my desk for an hour right then and there. I just had to do the one tiny thing. So
good.
There's so much that we could talk about, but people need to go buy the book and do the 5-day challenge. So again, here is the book, Tiny Habits, the small changes that change everything. Here's what I do. And my husband and I study a number of books that I'm reading. And BJ, you are also the voice of Audible. And I love it when the author is the voice, because then I feel like I'm learning about the person as I'm reading. So get the Audible and get the book and start digging into it. Listen and read at the same time. That's my secret to really starting to get ingrained in a topic.
Yeah. Now I'm going to build on that. Get the paperback version, y'all. That's my favorite version. And in the Audible, it was very unlikely that I could be the narrator. And I won't go into that here, but go to find Tiny Habits on Audible, and in front of the paywall, in other words, you don't have to pay for it. I got Audible to put a special preface that I recorded there. Go there, find that preface, click, listen, and I tell the story about why, for me, it was so important for me to narrate my own book, and why it was so, in some ways, so, I don't want to say miraculous, but just like, wow, what a breakthrough for me to be able to do that. And I think you will be surprised in what you hear in that story.
Yeah, I love that story. I absolutely love that story. It made me love you even more, BJ, if that was even possible. So, so of course, go to tinyhabits.com. You can buy and you can find out all about the book. There's great courses, the 5-day challenge. If you want to work with me on the 5-day challenge next week, then private message me, and I will make sure to sign you up myself. If you're a coach out there looking for something, Tiny Habits is a fantastic certification program as well. So lots and lots of ways to work with you, BJ. And because I'm a student of yours, some ways to work with me too.
Awesome.
BJ, we are at time. I can't believe it. Thank you so much. I'm not wiping a tear, but I should be.
Libby, you're amazing. Thank you for inviting me. It's been so fun getting to know you and Tiny Habits and behavior design and so on. What a delight to talk to you.
Yeah. And to everybody who tuned in this morning, thank you. I was seeing some of the the loves and likes flash up in the corner of my eye, but again, I get so consumed I can't look off to the side for the comments, but they'll be posted there, of course, to look at afterwards. And one more Coffee and Conversations before we finish up for the months of July and August, and that is with my friend Jessica Wright from She's on Top. We're going to be talking about networking and finding really good ways, significant ways to build your network and build your friendships along the way as well. So, BJ, thank you again. It has been fantastic. And I know I will see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.